It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. I'm glad you're with us today. We are joined by Das Williams. He's a member of the California State Assembly and someone who attended community college.
Absolutely.
And talk to me about how community college was important to your growth as you move through the educational process.
Well, first, it's an exciting time in the state of California. After voters passed Proposition 30,
right.
Temporary taxes for education, we really can reinvest in our education system. The challenge is that our real bottleneck is at community colleges.
And why is it important to you? I want to get a sense from you as a person, why, as someone who attended community college,
Absolutely.
that we need to focus on those institutions.
Well, I'll tell you, when I went to community college, I had just dropped out of high school.
Wow.
And I was homeless. I was living in my vehicle.
Wow.
But community college was there for me. I was able to, within 2 years and 1 summer, get enough units to transfer to UC Berkeley.
That's impressive.
Okay? And that kind of opportunity is so important for the state of California and for the future of the state. But the reality is right now there's so little availability of classes in the community college system that someone that was working class like me would not be able to transfer in that.
Working class is a kind way. I mean, you were homeless. You were
Absolutely.
literally on your own. But you mentioned you transferred in 2 years in 1 semester. Sadly, that's incredibly rare.
Absolutely.
Now, we're hopeful that with Prop 30's passage, it can become more common that you can get out after 2 years if that's your goal. But still, we have not restored the funding to community colleges that we had pre-recession levels.
And to be very fair, this is a problem that has been really exacerbated by the amount of cuts. But it's going to take a long time to get community colleges the funding that they need. We are proposing more in this year's budget. Right. But remember, we're not flush with money. As we say around the building right now, congratulations, we're broke.
Yes.
Which is a vast improvement from operating on a $26 billion deficit.
And it's interesting because I think although Governor Brown did his best to remind voters that Prop 30 does not necessarily give new money, it really was stopping the bleeding.
Right.
It wasn't new revenues per se.
It
was
gave
to
a
prevent
small
further
amount
cuts.
of new revenue to community colleges, to K through 12, to our local
Right.
schools. They will get a bump of funding over the next few years, and a tiny bit to UCs and CSUs. Not enough to roll back fees, but enough to freeze fees for the next couple years.
At the same time, we look at community colleges and the per unit charge has soared. $26 per unit, $36 per unit, $46 per unit. Will we see relief on that front before we speak about your proposal for
I don't think
class
so.
size?
That's still the cheapest in the nation.
And that's so interesting you mentioned that because it is the cheapest in the nation,
Right.
despite the fact the rise has been so dramatic over 2 years. So that begs the question, since it's still the cheapest in the nation, why should we give community colleges any more benefits financially?
Well, because right now we need more classes to be there. Last year, 500,000 students were turned away. And of the ones that are there, only half are completing, and this is half of the degree-seeking students.
Right.
Only half of them are transferring or getting a degree after 6 years, not after 2. And so what took me 2 years and 1 summer is now taking students 6 years, and half of them aren't making it at all.
So, sir, when we come back, I want to talk about a proposal you have to allow students to matriculate more quickly. We're speaking with Das Williams. He's a member of the California State Assembly. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back on California Edition. So, Mr. Assemblyman, you know that last year Santa Monica College proposed a formula whereby certain students could take classes at a per unit rate much higher than the standard rate. That proposal caused a whole host of consternation, but it did get you thinking.
Right. It got me thinking about what are our options. And though I did not support that proposal last year, I now feel that something maybe a little bit less controversial, but still an extension idea has to be tried, because we're going to take at least 6 years, probably maybe never, to get community colleges the absolute level of funding
Right.
that they need. And my feeling is, even if we do get that funding up, we should not be sacrificing the students that are in school now and the students that are going to be in school in the next 4 years to that eventual goal. We have to do something now.
So what you're looking to do is you're looking at intersession classes.
Allowing extension classes at the community college, which is already allowed at the UC and CSU and has not created a problem there. Allow the same thing at community college. And what I mean by extension is classes that are entirely funded by the user fee, not by a state subsidy.
It feels a bit like the SMC formula, which
Sure.
was attacked because it was seen as creating two different classes. Those that could afford to pay more money to get the statistics class
Right.
they need to graduate will be able to do it, and those that can't won't.
Well, I think that's leaving out a really important fact. There is already a two-tiered system between rich and poor at the community college. If mommy and daddy are paying for your way, you can take 6 years to transfer, no problem. You can party along the way. But if you're working for a living, or if you've got a family to raise, or if you're motivated to get a degree, you can't take 6 years. That's $11,000 to $18,000 worth of living expenses a year. And so is it really cheaper for working class students to stay in school a year or two longer with their living expenses, or to take a class that costs $600? And that's the question. The other question is,
the cost-benefit analysis is pay a little more now, you're out
pay
sooner.
a little bit now and pay and be able to transfer now. The other element that discussion leaves out is the fact that truly working class students qualify for Pell Grants. Veterans get veterans benefits.
What about Cal Grants?
Cal Grants wouldn't qualify for intercession, but Pell Grants.
Why not? Why couldn't they? Is
They
a better
could
question.
if we changed statute. But,
And?
But that's always a possibility.
Is it in your bill?
No, but I do have a bill to make sure that BOG waiver students
What's
do
BOG
FAFSAs.
All these acronyms.
Sure. Right now, only half students at a community college pay any fees at all because they get BOG waivers. But the system has not yet asked BOG waiver students to fill out FAFSAs. FAFSAs is the financial aid form that every single person needs to know out there. If they're going to have a kid or if they're going to know somebody, they need to fill out a FAFSA to get financial aid. Students that fill out FAFSAs will get financial aids for themselves from the federal government, and if they get their fees waived, the college gets the equivalent of their fees from the Pell Grant. And so this is money for students. This is money for our college system that right now we're
not accessing.
Yeah, we're not accessing at all. And so the reality is that working class students will have a better opportunity than most to take these classes because most of those BOG waiver students would qualify for a Pell Grant.
And so talk to us about the status of your bill. On its face, it feels compelling, it feels worthy, but look, every bill has its challenges. Have you spoken with friends on the Republican side of the aisle? Have you spoken with friends in the California State Senate, the governor's office, the superintendent of public instruction? Where are you?
Well, I think that number one, that there are a whole lot of community colleges districts that are supporting it.
Okay.
The most innovative, one of the most innovative out there, Long Beach City College, which just had the entire Senate go visit what they're doing on workforce. And Long Beach is really different in that usually the higher performing community colleges are in the better socioeconomic areas.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, right.
Long Beach is one of the best examples of a community college district in a more working class area that excels.
Okay, well, let's see what happens. His name is Das Williams. He's a member of the California State Assembly. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Cindy Marks. She is the president of the California School Boards Association. My name is Brad Pomerance. You are watching California Edition. Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Cindy Marks. She sits on the Modesto School Board, but she is also the president of the California School Boards Association, which is what?
It is an association that is an education nonprofit that is, it provides legislative advocacy for school board members around the state and for education. It also works with the judicial portion of the state and ensures a good education for all students.
5,500 elected and appointed school board members, so you have quite a job, no doubt.
Yes, that's 1,000 school districts and 6 million children.
Amazing. I want to speak with you, ma'am, about education funding today. We know that the voters were very generous in November. Surprisingly enough, I must say, I did not expect Prop 30 to pass, but it did pass. What did Prop 30 do and not do? Because I think some voters are still confused about what Prop 30 did and didn't do.
Okay, there's a lot of misconceptions about Prop 30. They do believe that it is going to add new money to education. There is some new money, but it isn't putting us back to the same levels as the 07-08 levels. And we lost, though, over $20 billion over these last 5 years. And it's not going to restore that, but it is going to help us with our deferrals, where the government has been passing along these debts and moving them forward so that we're never able to catch up. So this is going to help us catch up.
I got to talk to you about the deferrals, because I think a lot of people don't realize what had happened. During the budget crises of the last 5 years, the governors, it was two governors, they were borrowing money from the school's pot, mandated to be spent by Prop 98 to help balance the budget, and said, we'll pay you later. Almost $8 billion worth.
Right.
And so what Prop 30 apparently is going to do is have some of that money be paid back?
Yes, it's going to help us have the money on time so that we can pay our bills and not have to borrow. Many districts around the state have had to borrow from their own county just to be able to pay their employees. And so I think through Prop 30, it's going to help us get to a place where we're able to manage our budgets and be more fiscally responsible, at least at this point. I wish that it had gone further, but it's going to be and one of the difficulties with it is that it's not a long-term solution.
It sunsets.
It sunsets in 2017, 16,
4 years.
17.
In 4 years. The sales tax portion sunsets in 4 years. The tax on high-income wage earners sunsets in 7 years. I mean, 4 years, that's a blink.
Right,
It's literally a blink. So is the CSBA planning for that eventuality, or are we hopeful that we will see an economy continue to turn around, and as a result, it will be okay that we sunset?
Well, we're going to work with we're always planning to work with the governor and the legislature to ensure that education is funded adequately. It's not adequately funded, but our goal is to get it adequately funded so that we can get there.
Let's make some comparisons, if we may.
Okay.
So California, the Golden State, the biggest state in the union, where do we come down when compared to our sister states in terms of education funding?
Good question. We are at the bottom. We're 47th out of 50 states. We're about $2,850 below the national average, and many school districts and states fund their students at $14,000 to $15,000 per student, where in California we're only funded between $6,000 and $8,000 per student.
It's a problem that's persisted really for decades, since Prop 13 passed. I mean, this is not just as a result of the recession. Ms. Marks, when we come back, I want to continue our conversation, also talk about a new funding formula proposed by the governor.
Right.
We're speaking with Cindy Marks. She is the president of the California School Boards Association. For our viewers on HLN, thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, President Marks, I do want to ask, though, about the governor's proposed funding formula. It really would be revolutionary. Normally, Sacramento provides funds to school districts per pupil, per daily attendance, with a lot of strings attached. They're known as categoricals. The governor wants to change that completely. He wants to increase local control of funding, but he also wants to change the formula whereby school districts that have a higher percentage of English language learners and a higher percentage of students on free and reduced lunch, they would get more funding.
Yes.
Talk to me about that change to the local control funding formula.
It's beneficial, I think, for the students to be able to fund it, to have the money follow the students that have the greatest need. It's also, we appreciate that the governor is also looking at school boards and saying that our our jobs are important in how we fund our education system, how we allocate those funds to the neediest students. And it's amazing to have a governor that really does appreciate the local control factor.
Let me ask you about a few elements of that.
Okay.
With local control becomes more accountability. That could be a blessing or a curse. When you have more flexibility, you have more responsibility. So while in Modesto, you may have a very bright board that will want to do the best it can. In other boards, it may be that they want to pass an English language only program. So sometimes having strings attached is a good thing. Right. How do we still create those protections?
It depends on how the boards are going to determine what their greatest needs are. If I have a high English language learner population, which I actually do have a high English language learner population, those students are going to need those protections. But the governor, I like what you said earlier, that he does have accountability worked into it. And I believe that as the California School Boards Association trains and educates board members, especially on how to fund and how to fund proper programs in their areas, that the governor, that viewpoint is what we want to continue with, and that plan to educate those board members.
At the same time, it's intuitive that English language learners may have greater needs, that those on free and reduced lunch may have greater needs, but gifted students may have greater needs. I mean, a board gifted student becomes a troublemaker. And so I want to get a sense from you as to how we serve the needs of the entire spectrum. Right. Because gifted students, they have their challenges as well.
Well, that gives the board that responsibility to make those decisions. And so there's a base grant for every student funded at the level that they're funded at now. And then the plan is to increase that funding for those students that have greater needs. So those English language learners would receive more funding.
But could one argue that yes, English language learners have greater needs, those that are economically challenged have greater needs, but gifted students have greater needs? An unchallenged gifted student is a troublemaker.
This is true, and that's where you would, as a school board, you would have to set your priorities.
Why couldn't the state? I guess what I'm saying is,
could?
you know, it's this whole idea of picking winners and losers, and so. Look, it's intuitive, of course, and I'm just playing the other side. You know that.
Yes.
But it's intuitive that English language learners have challenges. But is it by definition that those on free and reduced lunch have challenges? I mean, you can be super bright and still come from a poor home.
True. You want to make sure that your funding is fair and equitable for all the students, no matter if they're gifted or they come from challenging circumstances. And that's the goal of every school board, is to try to determine what the greatest needs are. And that could be your GATE program in your area or your other programs that you might have to do college prep, which we're all working towards that in whatever our students come to us.
And then what happens when the programs work?
You have successful students.
Right.
They're going on to college.
But then should we look at funding formula changes if all of a sudden the extra funding works?
Well, then
I'm just playing it out.
I know. I think that if we do it that way, we're going to be able to reassess everything in that year and determine how successful we were with this funding.
In our final moments, how are you enjoying your tenure as president of the CSBA, traveling up and down the state?
Yes, it's been very exciting. I think one of the most amazing opportunities that I've had is to meet with other board members and talk to them about their challenges in their districts, and working with our legislators in Southern California. I was just there this last weekend at a summit on workforce development, and so I believe that where we're headed at CSBA this year is very stable, and it's been a privilege to be here and talk with you.
Congratulations. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Brian Maienschein. He's a member of the California State Assembly about other issues facing California's public education. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition. Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest again, Brian Maienschein, member of the California State Assembly. We're both soccer dads. Yeah. I'm sunburned like there's no tomorrow from soccer over the weekend. My heart's still pounding for my daughter's soccer finals, but be that as it may, I was stunned, Brian, when you told me that coaches, refs, no background check necessary for coaches and refs. How is that possible in youth sports?
Yeah, Brad, isn't that amazing?
It really is.
I was out, I coached both my daughter's soccer team.
Oh no, but
so
be that as it may.
I had no gray hair.
I was going to say, exactly. But you kind of had an epiphany.
I did. You know, I was out there, I remember being out there at practice, and all the parents had come and they dropped their daughters off.
Right.
And there was me and another coach, and we were coaching away, and I just remember kind of thinking, you know, there's no other parents here,
Right.
and what better avenue for a child predator than if, you know, to go out
Literally.
there and start coaching
Literally.
youth sports teams.
And so how did you come to realize that there was no formalized system for background checks?
So I went and researched it, and I realized that although some leagues, in fact many leagues throughout the
Right.
state, do perform background checks, but they all don't. So I wanted to, I thought it was important to do it. Thought it was important to have uniform procedures throughout the state.
And so under your bill, you have proposed a bill, AB 465. What's the mechanism?
Well, what they'll do now is all coaches and all people who have control over children in these leagues will have to undergo a Department of Justice background check to make sure
California?
that they're correct.
Okay.
To make sure they don't have any sexual indiscretions or child predator convictions.
And so have you spoken with Attorney General Kamala Harris? I mean, is this...
We have been working with her office,
Okay.
and they've been supportive. I think it's clear to all of us that we don't want to have any incidents where coaches are taking advantage
Of course.
of
And
our
so
children.
there'll probably be a charge, no?
There will be. It's going to be it's about a 17. Typically, the Department of Justice background check is about $17.
Okay.
Which obviously I think all of us will gladly
Fair
pay
enough.
through our league registration fees.
So you're a Republican in a legislature dominated by Democrats. You probably
keep reminding me of this,
I know,
Brad,
I'm sorry, but be that as it may, I know you have friends on the other side of the aisle. Tony Atkins, neighboring district. Be that as it may. Have you spoken with your Democratic friends? Because you will need support from Democrats, undeniably.
Absolutely. You know, and I think it's true that I'm a Republican.
Right.
But I think my constituents sent me here to get something done.
Yes.
And whoever was in the majority, Republicans or Democrats, you know, I intend to work with the other side.
Right.
I've done that throughout my career. I do have friends on the other side
You
of the
do?
aisle. Yeah,
Who would've
believe it
thought?
or not.
Right.
So I think that's important, and I'm proud to work with Democrats to get things done.
And so what about this bill, though, specifically? I mean, it's arguably, it seems like a no-nonsense bill. It should get bipartisan support.
Yeah.
Are you already getting those co-sponsors?
Absolutely. We've been working on that, and Republicans and Democrats. This is something that clearly crosses party aisles.
Right.
This is not a partisan issue. The protection of our children from child predators is something that both Democrats and Republicans do and should care tremendously about.
I also want to talk to you about mental health. We've spoken about the fact that you worked with the homeless population before you became a member of the Assembly. We know that many in the homeless population, just as an anecdote, are severely mentally ill. The numbers are quite high. We know with what happened at Sandy Hook and all the other tragedies with gun violence, there's some mental health challenges facing these perpetrators. You want to look at trying to increase flexibility with California mental health funding.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Homelessness and mental health are issues that are tremendously important to me just personally. I'm passionate about these issues because I think they've been ignored in our state for a very long time, and I do think there are solutions. My Assembly bill that you're referring to would give counties greater flexibility in how they go about funding mental health treatment. And right now, there is not enough flexibility, and so county to county, where there's differences. Clearly what works in San Diego doesn't necessarily work in San Francisco.
Brian, when we come back, I want to talk more about mental health. I also want to talk about foster youth. That's a population you're most passionate about. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back on California Edition. So clearly, Brian, if you think about Lassen County versus Los Angeles County, very different counties with different populations. Presumably, they do have those that are impacted by mental health, but you want to be able to change the formulas.
Exactly. The people who are on the ground dealing with this issue are county departments of health. And so to give them the flexibility as to how they're going to fund this and how they're going to treat this, I think is very important. And it's a step towards making sure that people with serious mental illness are treated, and then we also avoid potential tragedies down the road as well. That's another benefit to it as well.
And we know that flexibility is the new buzzword in Sacramento. The governor's looking at changing funding formulas for education, creating more local control and flexibility. Do you think that a bill like this would get that similar type of traction to allow counties to figure it out themselves? I mean, at some level, it's a realignment formula. Let the counties figure out how to deal with recidivism or post-conviction treatments.
I do. And it's funny, that last time I spoke with the governor, we talked about this level of flexibility. It's important to let localities work on these issues because they're the ones, again, that are dealing with this on a daily basis. So they're the ones in the best position to understand how these issues need to be addressed.
I want to talk about foster youth, a population that is so often neglected, not just in California, but throughout the country, a population that often becomes homeless. We know that pursuant to federal law, I think it's called McKinney-Vento, that foster youth, homeless youth, they have special protections in the public educational system. That being said, though, there are still some areas of California law that you believe need adjustment.
Yeah, and speaking of bipartisanship, Assemblymember Stone, a Democrat,
there you
and
have it.
I are jointly working on something to help foster youth graduate from high school. As it stands now, foster youth typically, or may typically, move around from school to school during the time that they're in high school.
Right.
And
under McKinney-Vento, they're supposed to be given every dispensation possible, but
it doesn't always happen.
It doesn't always happen.
And so what ends up happening sometimes is some localities have much stricter graduation requirements than the state requirements. So what Assemblymember Stone and I are requesting via our Assembly bill is that we definitely have to have standards. So the state standards, which are in place throughout the entire state of California, as long as those are met, foster youth that have moved around from school to school to school that may not have had the ability to take a class their freshman year because they weren't even in that school, right? They shouldn't be punished for that.
How did you know that this was an issue? I mean, this is such a very specific issue. Was it from your work as homeless services coordinator in San Diego?
Well, on that issue, both Assemblymember Stone and I have worked on that, I think, in our respective past. We both come from local government. For me personally, working on the homeless issue, I really became aware of it.
This is a known issue. I mean, it's not something that kind of came out. It's a problem.
I think it's a big problem, and I saw it come into where I was mostly affected by it personally was from the homelessness front, because I saw how many homeless people were former foster youth.
Of course, they aged out.
They aged out.
Right.
And it's a huge problem for them, and what we can do to reach them early on prevents them from potentially becoming a tragedy later.
Let me ask you more about education, if I may, and broaden it out, and talk about the governor's plan to increase flexibility through this local control funding formula. I mean, he is very specific. He wants to create a system whereby dollars are not so tied to specific programs, no categoricals, that local districts can spend money as they see best, and some local districts will get more money if they have high English language learner populations, high free and reduced lunch populations. What do you think?
Well, in general, I do favor local control. What does concern me a little bit is selecting winners and losers. And I think that's very difficult, particularly for the government to be the ones doing that. And so I wouldn't want to see successful school districts punished for being successful either. So I don't, he hasn't released all the details of all this. None of us have had a chance to review all of it yet, but I'm a little cautious on that front.
Interesting you mentioned that, because look, there's no doubt, you know as well as anyone, those that are from lower economically disadvantaged homes face additional challenges. English language learners face additional challenges. But without sounding elitist, and I'm sure I'm sounding elitist, gifted children have their set of challenges.
Right.
And so they're not going to be getting extra funding pursuant to this new formula.
We want every student in California, I do anyway, to get a quality education wherever they may fall on the spectrum. And I agree, they all have different needs. A gifted student has different needs than somebody who's not in a gifted class. I just don't, what causes me concern with this is, do you punish a school that's doing well, doing exactly what they should do by taking funding away from them?
Are you hearing this from soccer moms yet in your district? Is word getting out, or is it still?
I think it's starting to get out. I don't think it's out as much as it's going to be, and I think there is going to be a concern amongst people who have their kids in high-performing school districts or schools that they're very concerned about this. I think that'll come out more.
His name is Brad Maienschein, member of the California State Assembly. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition.